I don't know if you all realize that we cannot hear you, Sarah. Okay, great.
All right, can folks? I'm gonna try that again.
My speaker is on. I'd like to apologize to everybody in our building.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Can folks hear me? Ralph, can you hear me? Gina? Marianne? Okay, great. Okay, great. We're all here. All right, let's get started. Glasses keep plugging, so this will be a bit of a challenge. Give me one moment. All right. So I'd like to convene the December 7th, 2021 special board meeting of the Oak Park River Forest High School Board. It is now 7:32 p.m. We are currently meeting virtually pursuant to Governor Pritzker's initial 2020 declaration of a pandemic, which has been continued several times since then. And based on these health concerns, I, Sarah Scribes, head of the public body, don't believe it's either practical or prudent to hold an in-person meeting of the Board of Education tonight, nor for the public to be present. However, we will continue to abide, of course, by all protocols. And we do have an opportunity for people to sign up for public comment and speak live. I did see a comment from one of our folks who is going to, I believe, be making public comment. We will unmute you when it is your turn for public comment. So as we go down the list, we will say the name and then unmute the person who is about to speak. I just like to remind folks that public comment is 3 minutes in length and it's not meant to be dialogue with the board, of course. If any questions are answered during public comment, we will do our best to respond to those in email, provided that we have an email address to respond to. And then tonight we are going to abide by our policy concerning public comments, which is board policy 2.230. We rarely have done this, maybe never, but we do have a policy that states that we can limit public comment to 30 minutes. The reason we will be enforcing that this evening when we haven't other times, for example, such as with a curriculum change, is because this meeting tonight was convened rapidly. Folks have made time in their schedules to be here. Certainly this wasn't something that people had time to really plan for. So we are going to honor everyone's schedules by holding to that 30-minute time period. However, if people do want to send us comments, the BOE@oprfhs.org email account, we get them and we read them. So with that, yeah, this is our first person for public comment this evening. Roll call. Sorry.
Mr. Coxey,
Here.
Dr. Mohanraj,
Here.
Mr. Arpin,
Here.
Mr. Henry,
Here.
Mr. Martieri,
Here.
Ms. Harris,
Here,
and Ms. Dixon Freud.
Here. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay, the first person we have to speak is Ross Rizzuto.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Was that a yes? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yes,
we can hear
yes.
you.
Thank you. Earlier tonight, in another virtual OPRF meeting room, 8th grade families were learning about what to expect at OPRF next year. In traditional years, it would be exciting time for families and their 8th graders as they walk the halls at OPRF and discuss all that OPRF had to offer. Not so much this year. Right here, in yet another virtual meeting room, we're about to witness what OPRF really has become. Freshman families would be better served watching this meeting for true insight. These often avoidable crisis-type meetings are why more families are losing faith in the direction of OPRF and looking for school alternatives. The family rally this past Saturday was a good indicator of such a growing movement. A few inconvenient facts before moving on to more important topics. Fact, last Thursday, OPRF families received a message from the school noting an uptick in COVID cases and stated, quote, "We are in close contact with the health department." Fact, also on Thursday, OPRF was selling tickets to the OPRF basketball game and promoting school community support for the event. Fact, on Friday evening, OPRF basketball players and a packed student section attended the game at UIC. Our community was supportive of this event, as was I. Fact, we beat Fenwick. Fact, minutes after the game, while many students were heading home, the community received another message from the school stating all activities, sports clubs, etc. were now closed through winter break. Fact, as kids were packed like sardines on the L coming home from the game, enjoying themselves and looking at their phones, a carefully crafted post-game email read, "Protecting the health and safety of our entire community is our utmost priority." Fact, the knee-jerk and one-size-fits-all solution of full student activity closures included much less risky activities such as a dance competition, club, sports, music, and theater. The adults on this call and in this room understand what happened. You know who else does? Our students. They saw right through the nonsense, came together and said, enough. Integrity and trust do matter. The real reason for my comments tonight is that our school is failing at its core mission, educating our kids and allowing them to grow. ISB just released the annual educational outcomes and OPRF results are dismal, pre and post-COVID. A few more inconvenient facts. Fact, OPRF is producing lower SAT achievement scores compared to 2017. Fact, student groups that our school claims to be laser focused on helping have proficiency rates of 13% in math and 25% in English language arts. Both are lower compared to 2017. The current leadership teams, many who have been at OPRF for some time, own these outcomes. The students have been in OPRF's care for the past several years and lower state measured academic performance metrics, which lead to less opportunities for our students. My point is, after whatever we are listening to tonight and doing here tonight, can OPRF please get back to the business of educating our kids? We need to quit pointing out our differences and holding special meetings and instead focus on helping our students succeed. We need to start calling nonsense, nonsense. Please lead our students wisely. Go Huskies.
Thank you. Gail?
Brian, I would say Brian.
Did you say Bryn Hovde? Could that be it? Could it be me?
Yes.
Okay, great, great. We should be ashamed of what is happening in Oak Park right now. This rally that occurred at the high school over the weekend can best be described as a white angry mob. Images from that rally could be held up next to images from Oak Park in the 1950s, and the only thing that would look different is the quality of the camera. Grown people shouted down a Black woman who happens to be in a position of authority and expertise. They called her names, they booed her. She was told she shouldn't stay at her home, that it might not be safe. There is a core group of adult Oak Parkers that have been hostile and angry for months about Black women in charge. These same folks were furious with Dr. Kelly, wondered if they should march to her home in order to get the response they wanted. This core group seemed only so happy to take this recent decision from OPRF administrators and weaponize it to leverage the very understandable disappointment of very many parents and students, to turn that disappointment into vitriol and hatred. Board members, administrators, I don't envy you in having to navigate the variety of comments, complaints, and feedback that you get from the whole spectrum of Oak Park. But this behavior, this is racism. Doesn't always look like a brick thrown at a cafe. Sometimes it looks like this, and it's unacceptable. I don't think that many of the people perpetuating this behavior actually believe it's racism. I believe them when they rationalize this behavior. When they cry for data, they point to their own armchair health expertise. I believe that they believe themselves. But we know, however, that intentions do not mitigate the impact. And the impact of this behavior on our community has been significant. I can only begin to imagine the impact of this behavior on Dr. Chappell and her family. I deeply and earnestly believe that mental health of our young people matters. We should be pouring into mental health supports for those who are most impacted by these and any future mitigation. We should join forces across taxing bodies to create mental health plans, something that young activists have been calling for months. But I fear this isn't really about mental health. I fear this is about power and control and individual entitlement over collective good. I'm deeply grateful to Dr. Chappell-Magruder for her work, dedication, relentless focus on our community's health. I am grateful to this administration, the administrators of every public institute that has had to wade into this mess daily, and we really don't deserve you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, who's next?
Shaba.
Shoga.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Good evening. My name is Shobha Mahadev, and my husband and I are parents of a junior at OPRF. Like many others, our child was devastated by the news over the weekend of the cancellation of extracurriculars. From a mental health perspective, our child suffered greatly last year, and going back to school in person, particularly as part of the theater and choir programs, thank you, theater and choir, has been a lifeline to them and to us. They were disappointed by the cancellation or postponement of Prisms, as well as to move to make auditions for the musical Remote, and shed many tears on Friday evening. We were therefore grateful for the announcement of the reinstatement of these activities as long as they could be conducted safely. However, our family was horrified by the images and vitriol aimed at Dr. Chappell-Magruder and the OPRF administration as these decisions were being made. There is simply no reason to target Dr. Chappell for her guidance and expertise in a fast-moving public health crisis. I think we can all agree that her aim and the OPRF administration's aim in these decisions was to keep everyone safe and healthy in the face of concerning evidence of several outbreaks of COVID-19 and to avoid the even more devastating outcome of closing school together. We are concerned about reports that Dr. Chappell faces threats to her safety, in addition to a lack of respect from members of this community. This is unacceptable and not in line with the conduct we should be modeling and teaching our children. Finally, while we are pleased to see that there are now some efforts to enhance mitigation strategies, we wish some of these had been implemented and enforced earlier by the school. It certainly would have been better to open up the campus or find larger spaces for lunch to further incentivize or mandate testing and to enforce masking more aggressively, particularly at the kind of events we were talking about earlier, basketball games and sporting events. We hope the administration continues to take these steps going forward. Thank you all for all you are trying to do to keep our kids safe.
Thank you.
Cynthia Brito. Yes.
while we're here.
Hello, this is Royal speaking. So I want to start off. Dear OPRF HS board members, my name is Ray and I am an organizer with Royal and a junior at OPRF. We have collectively wrote this statement regarding the actions that have recently occurred with COVID policy. Royal is made up of 16 Black and Latinx OPRF students, and almost all of us participate in sports and extracurriculum activities. What is glaringly clear to us, witnessing the events of the past week, is that our lives do not matter, and that white student and parent interests are considered the most important. White interests matter more. The public health crisis of racism and compounded health issues, mental health issues that disproportionately impact people of color. This year, on May 25th, 2021, we organized a rally calling for a no-fail policy to be immediately implemented to relieve students of color and their families from the double pandemic of COVID-19 and continued racial violence against us. The mostly white-led rally held at the high school on Saturday, and the subsequent swiftness of high school administration to give in to their demands hit us hard. When we have organized and asked for changes in the high school, we are met with roadblock after roadblock. We are told never-ending process and protocols, but when white people demand something from the high school, it is granted in less than 48 hours. Even before the results of yesterday's saliva testing are available, research has shown that this pandemic has hit Black and Latinx and Indigenous people the hardest. Our families are not privileged, and we do not have the same level of access to housing, health, employment, benefits, and/or financial resources. The spread of COVID-19 for our families would be devastating. This entitlement losing 2 weeks of activities is not a life nor death situation. But for our families, contracting COVID-19 is a life and death situation. But for our families contracting, not only if we are affected with this virus, but because of the disproportionate impact due to historical racial violence done to our community, we can be evicted if our parents get sick and lose their jobs. Medical debate due to hospitalization is a disastrous for our families. To us, this ill-formed rally was mocking real activism. They literally called the defunding of health department and targeted our public health director, who is a Black woman. We are disappointed with the administration, and it is clear who lives really matter more.
Thank you, Ray. Next person is Jennifer Logan.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Thanks. I'd first like to start before my prepared comments and respond to a few of the comments that have just been said. As the organizer of the rally on Saturday, my husband and I did that from our hearts. We were devastated for the kids. I had no idea what color the director of the Department of Health was. I didn't know if she was she, he. None of that was taken into consideration as we moved forward in reaching out to our social media contacts to attend and share their dismay with the way that the events came down on Friday night. And if you looked at who spoke at the rally, I would say at least half of the people were of color or Latin descent. It was not a white privilege, white everywhere rant against the school board or the Department of Health. Having said that, I want to thank the board and the Department of Health for working so swiftly to provide additional transparency, as well as to lift the temporary ban that we felt was imposed as a knee-jerk reaction. I understand one of the ways we were able to get the activity ban lifted was to increase student testing via the SHIELD program, which was done yesterday. My question to the board here is, what are we going to do when the number of identified cases increases? which it will, given the increased testing. Is there a threshold that will cause further action? And if so, is that threshold determined? Dr. Chappelle said last night on the Oak Park trustee meeting that further action would be dependent on the circumstances. It's a very vague answer, and it got us in trouble once without following any kind of CDC guidelines or anything else. So we urge the Oak Park River Forest Board of Directors to outline some metrics, even at a high level, that would allow all parents and students to understand what the triggers are to cause further action. Secondly, I have a question of why are we testing asymptomatic vaccinated kids, which goes against CDC's recommendation? My last question, it's still unclear to many of us who has final say in restrictions or removal of activities or even school closing. Is it the Oak Park River Forest Board of Trustees? Is it the Oak Park Village? Is it the Oak Park Department of Health? And if it is the Department of Health, is it a recommendation that they're posing to the high school, or is it a mandate? And if the recommendation and or mandate is coming from the Department of Health, is it one person's decision, or is there a consensus that has to come to from a group of medical professionals or others in the community to weigh in on that decision? It's very unclear to the community how this decision was made, and I think transparency there would be extremely valuable for all of us. Thank you for your time.
Others? Okay. So just briefly, I want to kind of set expectations for this meeting. The board cannot have a discussion together absent calling a public meeting. So that's why this is a board meeting, but it's really a board discussion. There is no action item planned for this evening. There's no action item on the agenda, which means there will not be one. However, we do have some questions which I sort of came up with myself kind of very quickly to kind of serve as prompts, but it is meant really to be an open dialogue between board members, the administration, and Dr. Chappell-Magruder to kind of get answers to some of the questions we had around how do we prevent this next time? You know, are there things that we could have done better, et cetera. So I know from speaking with several board members that they have questions already prepared. And Dr. Johnson, do you want to go first though, or?
I can share information first, kind of from a background perspective, if the board would like that. Otherwise, we can do whatever you want.
Why don't you do just like a highlights, and then we can start with some questions.
Sure. So just from a very high level, let me give some background on COVID cases and where we are at OPRF, and kind of a little bit of information about the facts about Thursday, Friday until now, the past 5 or 6 days. First, since the beginning of the school year, the overall COVID cases at OPRF have been relatively and consistently low single digits week in and week out. We have really seen that all the way up until the week of November 26th, and more specifically, really it was December 1st, last Wednesday, that the first time that we saw sets of linked cases at the high school with 4 new cases of COVID being identified in our student population. As we were gearing up towards contact tracing regarding those 4 cases, I had a conversation with the director of Oak Park Public Health, Dr. Chappell, about how we might be able to mitigate and respond to these cases. A variety of ideas were discussed, and at that time, that led to the communication that I sent out to all families community on Thursday, December 2nd, that highlighted the importance of the 3 Ws, the mitigations we have in place, and it also strongly encouraged families to keep their children home if they were experiencing any symptoms of any type, because our nurses have reported out that was something that was becoming more prevalent. Kids were coming to school with some symptoms. Behind the scenes, we also worked on improving our communication and ability to take kids who were vaccinated yet close contact students and isolating them during lunch so they could take their masks down to the place where they weren't around other students. And again, that was on Thursday that we revised our communications and began working with those kids in a little bit different way When the weather was nicer, being outside was something that we could rely on a little more regularly. And so what happened after that, on Friday, throughout the day, positive cases started to pop up. And throughout that day, we had a total of 5 cases that came to us on Friday. And that led to a need for increased mitigation. So late in that day, roughly around 3:30 or so, I had another conversation with Dr. Chapman, in which she was able to map out a number of ideas that she recognized and willingly communicated were going to be hard and challenging for the school. These included, for 2 weeks, stopping all activities, determining a different way to spread kids out for lunch, utilizing additional spaces. She again expressed concern about in front of the auditorium in various spaces where kids can kind of gather a little bit more loosely than they can when there's a traditional table in front of them. She talked about saliva testing and the need for about 80% or specifically 80% of our student population to participate in the saliva program, and just generally explored various ways to try to find ways to spread students out in our existing classrooms. A number of these mitigations are ones that are in some degrees already in place, but exceedingly challenging to pull off. The 80% population, for example, we have 60-some% of our students who are enrolled in the voluntary shield testing program that we have. It's required to be voluntary by the state of Illinois. We don't have an option to mandate that. Scaling that up by Monday to 80%, we knew was going to be a significant challenge. We knew we could do better and we could do something else with lunch, given where our numbers were going. And so we began those conversations fairly quickly, knowing that we would need the weekend to play through what those mitigations might look like. And that would, be something that we would know a lot more about as time wore on. Moving students out into different classrooms and, thinning out student population within the classroom, another place where students are congested. Very challenging to do in a high school with this size, with the number of classrooms we have and the resources we have as far as teachers are concerned. So that really left the 2 weeks for an the 2 weeks hiatus for what the state refers to as non-essential activities in their COVID guidance. So that's really the first step. That was a conversation we had there. I got off the phone with Dr. Chappell, our team collected, we began to generate ideas and figure out how we were going to respond to this information. And it occurred to me that clarity was needed. So again, we talked again with a few of us and gained clarity that from Dr. Chappell asking, are you stating that we need to do this? We need to, we need our extracurriculars, our activities, our non-essential activities to be put on highest. She clarified yes. And our team got going. I spent the next several hours working with members of our administrative team, our teachers union, talked to Dr. Spivey about
Doctor.
Talked to board president Spivey, thank you. And we began the work of figuring out how we were going to implement this and in what way we would do so. We knew we had communication plans and we couldn't just kind of flip a switch to get this word out. And so we also knew we had a number of activities going on, and we wanted to make sure we treated those activities with care and with responsibility, given the fact that we knew this announcement was where we needed to go. And so the announcement was sent out with the understanding that it was absolutely a short announcement given where we were. With the explanation, it was consciously a short announcement. We knew that more thorough information was needed, and we said as much in the communication, saying that hold tight, we're going to get more information out as soon as we can on Saturday. And on Saturday, Dr. Chappell and I and members of my team spent hours figuring out ways that we could adjust a little bit and successfully implement some of the possibilities to for the mitigations in front of us. We were able to find that the 80% wasn't something that was hard and fast, that was absolute. We were able to throw out the idea of KN95 masks that I'm wearing now, and definitely surgical masks, no longer kind of loose-fitting cloth masks or anything like that, as an additional mitigation strategy. And with members of our B&G and our administrative team, figure out how we were going to handle lunch. And it was really those 3 mitigations that I'm talking about: spreading out lunch, the masks, and figuring out how we were going to handle testing that opened the door definitely for an altered approach. And so that, realizing that definitely could be a path forward, and also realizing that SHIELD was able, throughout that day, we were in conversations with them about scaling up the testing capacity of SHIELD as early as Monday. We knew that we wanted them in early this week. We had preliminary conversations about them. Nothing was confirmed. But they really worked with us throughout Saturday to get folks in. And so we were able to confirm that they can come in on Monday and scale up the testing that we did there. So with those mitigations kind of planned out, we worked throughout Sunday to figure out those logistics as well, and sent the subsequent communication out to everybody on Sunday evening. I do want to share that on the first day that we were able to implement these new kind of stricter mitigations, it meant a lot for our faculty to come together the way they did to pull this together. They worked extraordinarily hard. First, it required, there's no other way to say it, it required the sacrifice of a curricular area to pull this off. PE, health, they were not able to meet at all on Monday. Our physical education classes are not able to meet throughout this week in order to pull this off because of two reasons. Number one, we needed the field house and the Oneness gym to help the mitigations and the mitigations for lunch to be in place. Without those extra spaces, spreading our kids out more during lunch in this school at this time, with where we are with our construction, it just simply is impossible. So we had to make that difficult decision. Our physical education teachers not only leaned into this challenge, as I was talking to somebody else earlier today about it, they were champions of the challenge. They led not only by saying, okay, we understand that we need to make this temporary sacrifice right now. They were hugely influential in the second mitigation, which was the implementation of saliva screening with SHIELD. We were able to do that through the PE classes in the auditorium and the little theater. So without their support, that simply doesn't happen. And the masking policy we've seen as a result of all of this conversation a needed kind of setting of the expectation for that regarding masking. That has gone very well. So all three, lunch, the screening, and the masks have gone really well. Nothing is perfect, but Monday went exceptionally well, hitting the targets that were set for us to allow the return to activities, legitimately and under the collaborative guidance of Dr. Chapman McGruder. I want to point out a little bit of extra information before I pause. First, I want to give kudos to some community members who stepped in to really help us pull off that screening. Were President Spivey, or Member Arkin, Lori Gary, Anita Lidling, and Carrie Evanston all volunteered significant hours on Monday to help make this happen. We tested 1,651 students. The last count I had on Monday, and the folks at SHIELD said that this was a one day, one building record as far as they were concerned. So the logistics worked there. I will say, just as we heard in comments, and just as we could have anticipated before, and just as we knew, there were an increased positive cases that came as a result of those tests. That is the intent of that screening, of course, at that scale. And that's what we found out. We have 20 positive cases that were identified as a result of that screening. We were able to get those results back incredibly quickly, communicate with those families, and move forward. So I am proud of the effort the school made in order to come together and make this happen. And I think at this point, I will open it up, although I realize right at this moment that as I'm getting props, I foolishly did not give props out to the one who helped to really organize so much. And it's the same community volunteer who helped us with a number of the school who did so much work there. So Misty Olsen, kudos to you for helping to help make this happen. So with that said, I'll turn it over to the board and your questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge, I believe we have Dr. Chapel McGruder also present on the call with us. And I'd like to thank her for making time tonight, obviously short notice. We're very grateful that she's here. So I think what might be the most sort of succinct way to do this is just to start with board questions. And I'm going to start with Tom because I know he has his questions laid out because he had already sort of shared them with me earlier. So Tom, since you're the best organized tonight, I'm going to hand it over to you to start, please.
So in the agenda, you kind of had framework of sections of questions. Is that just for prompts, or do we want to freestyle go?
It's freestyle.
Okay.
Yeah, just those are just prompts. This is freewheeling, whatever you need to know.
And are we questions, statements and comments, or just questions?
I will leave that to your discretion.
I want to make a couple statements just to kind of ground myself in this discussion from where my head's at. Okay, so I would also like to thank Dr. Chapel for being with us tonight. I would like to publicly say that the behavior of some of our community members is appalling, as I've heard. But I do think it's critical that we as a board can have this discussion to fully understand what the process is and what the metrics are by which we're making decisions that are impacting our students. You just hearing the number that you said, Greg, of 1651, that's voluntary by students. So that kind of gives a magnitude of how many students are really wanting to get back in the game, in my mind. So it supports what I've heard, and knowing that this issue, is a big one in terms of the mental health and academic success of our students. I'm always the historian, so I have to play a moment of just my perspective of this, because when we were making decisions as a board or decisions that the administration presented, the whole theme was to try to do things so that we wouldn't have these knee-jerk or flips in the way we were handling it. And we kind of went out on a limb initially when in going fully remote so that we wouldn't have to flip-flop. And that's really been a theme to provide that consistency with our students. And this is certainly not in line with that approach, warranting the need for delving into it. From a board perspective, we were involved in decision-making, one, to approve the return to fully in-class, in-person activities, and that was in August or thereabouts, I'm guessing, I'm trying to remember. So that was one decision, and then the other decisions were to support the MOUs, MOAs that were to require vaccinations. Okay, so that's been the level of decision making from a board standpoint up to now, and since that time, what's happened? Just to kind of say how much water has gone under the bridge. We've had FDA approved vaccines that weren't approved. We've had approval of multiple generations of or different age groups for vaccines, development and recommendation of boosters. We've had the emergence of new COVID strains, including the presence of Omicron in Illinois as of a few hours ago, I heard. We've continued to gather, our nation is gather a lot of information, not only on COVID transmission, but also on its impact on the health of individuals, both vaccinated and unvaccinated. So a lot, my point, the CDI guidelines, CDC guidelines have changed. My point is, a lot's changing, and it's changing quickly. And so our mantra has been listen to science, which I fully support. That science is moving fast, so we need to move fast. We took basically a two-pronged approach, which was one, to stop the spread, by mask, social distance, wash your hands, with the 3 Ws, those activities. And then a second one, which was aimed at promoting vaccination as much as we could. And so I want to understand as we go through this, when I get to questions, what our strategy was and what the data in action are. Okay, I mean, we're tremendously fortunate to have a nation in a district with resources that can support the vaccination. I think our students and staff have responded overall very well to what we've been asking to do. And I think even this week's activity of 1,600 shows that there are lapses, okay? But I also know that the data says that remote learning, remote activity has had serious impacts on academics, on mental health. And so how are we balancing these different factors in our decision-making is part of what I want to understand. We know as a community, as a district, we have really valued extracurricular activities because of the positive impact it has on academics across our whole student population. So with that said, my hope is to understand the process and the data, and also what we can do from a facilities and operational standpoint to take the right actions to assure that our students can be in person for both their academics and their extracurriculars. So that's my preamble. My question, number one, and I have a variety, and I guess my intent is I'll do one and then let you navigate, share it to others. Okay?
Sure.
So my question is this, and it's kind of long-winded. Our initial focus and measures back when we met and was presented was all aimed at looking at measuring positivity of the virus. That was really the sole data that we had. How many people had contracted the virus? That was okay. Not on anything to do with really the health, hospitalization, et cetera, those metrics. And so what measures are we using today that were used in this decision making, and how does it align with what we've done as a district? And then what are our expectations? I guess I'm gonna just say I'm gonna stop right there. What metrics are we using, and are we factoring in vaccination, not vaccination in our decision making?
Tom, if that feels, do you want to indicate who you want to have to answer that, or should we?
I guess, I don't know. I mean, is that for our public health support group? I would
I would
think.
assume so.
Okay, so
I can start.
thank you.
So to explain the measures that I took into account when notifying the superintendent that we are at a place where we need to put in mitigations, the measures that were concerning to me was not just the cases from that week, but the cases from the week before. I've been, the uptick in cases started the week of Thanksgiving and then went into the following week. What happened at the high school was that almost half of the cases that you all had throughout the entire first 17 weeks of school, you had in 2 weeks. And so that is concerning. The next piece was that once we started to put mitigations in place, those mitigations did not seem to be working, but instead the numbers continued to increase. And that's definitely opposite of what you want to see and what's expected. The other is that of the cases that we had, the number of close contacts were extremely high. Each of the cases had about 50 to 70 close contacts. The majority of those close contacts were within vaccinated people. When we started to look at the number of, as we started with, the initial cases and kind of following them and looking at the people who were testing positive subsequently, it was 76% amongst the vaccinated and 24% non-vaccinated. And so here was a concern that we are kind of in 6 to 7 months for some of your students post-vaccine, and we're worrying about the vaccine's ability to still have the same level of immunity that it had before. As you mentioned, boosters now exist, but they don't exist for the age group in which are students in your school, the majority of your students. And so those were pieces that we looked at. We also looked at the community transmission rate in your school and compared it to the community transmission rate in Oak Park in general. The 17 cases of last week put the community transmission rate of Oak Park River Forest High School at 4 times the rate of the community. So those were all the kind of indicators that we looked at that led to us needing to put in mitigations into place to stop this from happening. And we also knowing another data point was that only a few hundred students were getting tested. So we knew that for sure the amount of virus that was in the school was probably not accounted for already in those cases. Also that the people who were testing positive were people who were symptomatic largely. And so we knew that we were missing asymptomatic spread. So not having a firm number of cases that we're dealing with in the school, seeing the cases continually increase as we put mitigations into place, and concern for the amount of close contacts and the spread that could be happening as a result of pre-symptomatic cases were the reasons why we needed to put some mitigations into place.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got started. I have others, but I want to make sure others have an opportunity. So thank you that was helpful. I guess I have some follow-ups to that.
I mean, I think if you have follow-ups to the same question, we should probably stick with it until that sort of your follow-ups are exhausted, and then go to the next person. That'd be easier for folks to follow.
Hey, Sarah, I'm sorry. Kabrib actually had his hand up prior to Tom, and you did not ask any of us if we had questions prepared. So I'd really appreciate it if you would let potentially some other board members ask some questions, as Tom suggested.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I will yield to others and then come back.
Okay.
That's
Agree?
I have no.
Yeah, sure. Because I heard Dr. Johnson talk about the mitigations that we attempted to do. I hear Dr. Chappell speak now. So I'm missing some clarity in something. So just bear with me as I try to understand where we are. So as I understand it, these cases started popping up 2 weeks ago, or well, not 3 weeks ago, if we look at it that way. Mitigation was put into place. Assume that is distancing, wearing a mask, testing, right? But it seems like those weren't working because they weren't done effectively. I'm only asking that because it seems that now, as of Monday, we were doing these mitigations, wearing a mask properly, distancing at lunch properly, increased number of testing properly. I guess I'm wondering what changed that we could do that effectively now and not prior. Because as I'm understanding, I listened to the village board meeting yesterday, and it seemed to me from my understanding, that it wasn't shut down the activities is the best way to stop potential spread or mitigate it. That was all that was left. Nothing else worked. So what I'm not understanding is, how are these effective measures working now, 2 weeks after the fact we were actually given that information before? Because it's not clear for the village, it's not clear for the community members, and it's really not clear for me. Because we're in a special meeting now over a very disturbing weekend. And it's not very clear to me how we got here. So I'll make sure I ask the question according to this. Maybe that's where you get the clear question I'm asking. If we're doing mitigation measures now as of Monday, how or why were we not doing them prior to the shutdown of activities on Friday?
Yeah, so let me respond to that. I don't know if Dr. Chapel wants to speak to that too, but I can certainly respond to that. So first, regarding masking, that was something that has been ongoing throughout the entire semester, as you all know. And just give me 1 second, the screen shares it here. That's something we have been going throughout the entire semester, and without a doubt, everybody in the school, students and whatever, you know, we've all experienced a level of mask fatigue, and there's no doubt that this is something we absolutely have struggled with within this school. When I was able to talk with Dr. Chapel, actually late on Friday night and then through much of Saturday, she offered the possibility of giving us a large number of first N95, KN95, surgical masks. You know, she can really provide this to make sure that everybody has the best type of mask that we can give them, and that helped to kind of spearhead a greater focus on that one mitigation. But that really is the least significant of the changes, although I'm really appreciative of having those masks in the school. The one I'm wearing right now comes from such a source. The most significant changes is that we knew we had to make a change based off of the Friday conversation. We knew we had to make a change over the weekend for lunches. That was something that, without a doubt, no matter what happened with activities or anything else, we had to find a way to make a change for lunch. We also knew that we were up against the challenge, and so sitting down and figuring out how to do that meant that we had to make another sacrifice in the school. That as a school, we had drawn a line in the sand and said we would not be making that sacrifice. And that specifically was related to the curricular areas. We did not want to take over another gym space. In this case, we needed to do two additional gym spaces prior to this in order to spread students out. Keep in mind that we are a school district, a school building right now that is in a challenging spot. We do not have our normal south cafeteria in place that we normally have that is larger than the One West gym. That really hampered our ability to spread our students out during lunch. And so it was sitting down, you know, over the weekend and saying, all right, we need to make this change for PE. We had committed to that, making some sort of change for lunch even on Friday. But we didn't know exactly what that was going to be. So, so that was the first thing. And the second thing I can speak to is saliva testing. It is absolutely volunteering. We also made a commitment for student learning. As we came off of the pandemic from last school year, we knew that student learning and being in the classroom was of a primary importance. And we made the commitment that we were going to make saliva screening available to our students after school and during the lunch periods. We did not want to disrupt class periods, the instructional classes for our students for the purpose of saliva screening. This was something we'd shared up, you know, with community and with our students from step one, working collaboratively with our teachers for that purpose. And so it really was the conversation on Friday. It really was a conversation on Friday where we realized the numbers were going up, that, you know, the non-essential activities needed to be sacrificed, that all the other mitigations we knew had to be in place as well. I also, there was one other thing I wanted to share about how the mitigation unfolded, but Kabir, essentially that responds to that question. The other point I was going to make, Kabir, was simply that, and for everybody, was that, you know, it was my letter to the community on Thursday, December 2nd, was the point at which kind of an increased focus on the other mitigations prior to the numbers on Friday were put in place. The conversation that I had with Dr. Chapman-Magruder on Wednesday was, the first conversation we had post Thanksgiving, post the 2-week spread that we're talking about. The first conversation we had about, look, we got to find a way to get something additional done. So you're really talking about a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday series of conversations that led to this point. I mean, we're talking about a very quick transition, and that speed is really significant for the conversation.
So just so I'm clear, the first time we were told about the mitigation strategies was of Wednesday of last week. Is that what you're saying?
The first conversation that I had with public health about shifts to, like, specific shifts to mitigation strategies was on Wednesday the 1st, and that was specific to where we felt the spread was, and that was students who are vaccinated, who are in congested spaces, but are close contacts. And that is borne out in the data. We have seen that is where that goes. I think that was spot on. But yeah, it was that conversation on the 1st.
So I guess
If I can clarify,
okay.
that I began talking with the school nurses and the contact tracers, and that's typically how we work when there's an uptick in cases. We go directly to the school nurses, the contact tracers, and start to talk about what it is that you're seeing, what it is that we're seeing, and how we can make some changes to address those. And so that's our first step, and that's where we were when we saw the initial uptick. And then the following week, the Monday, is when we started to see, like, oh, this is concerning. And then we started to have more conversations with the school nurses that led to the conversation that I had with Dr. Johnson on Wednesday.
Okay, so for clarity, we knew the week prior, I'm not saying you specifically, Greg, because obviously you're the ones you had the conversation. We knew prior to that, we had to do mitigations in place. We didn't do them until it got to the following week. Now so here's what I'm trying to get at. It seems like we had mitigation recommendations. We didn't do them effectively or properly. Friday comes, we shut down extracurricular activities. There's an outcry, right? We say we will give the activity back. We do a mitigation strategies. We're given 2 weeks prior. Optically, it doesn't look good. It's a little concerning to me because our public health director has been harassed and threatened. It should be denounced on every level, from the village board, from the village president, every level, because someone's safety is in line here, right? It's disturbing to me. So, but it seems like this could have been avoided because we have mitigation strategies that we were told, not mandated. I think this is told, correct me if I'm wrong, was mandated, correct me, that we were told we should do the week prior. We get to the following week, we're not doing it. Friday, we do the extreme measure, shutting down activities. Then Monday, 2 days later, we're able to do the mitigation strategy we've done 2 weeks before. Is that a fair assessment? Because I'm just trying to make sure everyone has the same clear picture I'm trying to get to. Is that a fair assessment?
I honestly can't speak to the mitigation strategies that were discussed prior to the 1st. The shifts to the lunch, and certainly the type of mitigation strategies that we're talking about right here for something significantly spreading out and shifting PE and testing the 2,000 students. That wasn't part of the conversation we had that I'm aware of at all. In all transparency.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. And that's your conversation. But what it sounds like as a district, I'll say we had strategies that were given to us. It doesn't appear we follow them effectively, but we were able to do so within 2 days. And really 2 days of a very disgruntled, angry, I will say embarrassing crowd. On Saturday night, that was yelling, name calling in front of our kids. Mind you, this paper we're depicting for our children here. And this is not unique just to Poe Park. We've seen this nationwide where public health officials are being threatened. Board members even being threatened for the stances on this pandemic we're still in. So I'm just trying to understand, how do we get here? And what are our takeaways we need to learn from this to not do this kind of behavior going forward? Because it was avoidable. And I think we owe an apology to our public health director, because I don't care what decision we make, whether it's me or Dr. Johnson or anyone else, no one should feel unsafe in their home with their family. And we need to own that and say it publicly and denounce it on every level. Because I heard the board meeting yesterday. I'm not really satisfied with their please stop behaving badly. No, that's not a denouncement. It needs to be said, it's wrong. It's deplorable. I'm going to yield my time because I think what I'm hearing is we didn't implement our strategies correctly when we had a chance to as a district, which led to Friday being a very extreme action to get attention, maybe to get something to happen. And we're doing it now because it seems like we can do it in 2 days, we could done it in 2 weeks. I will yield my time to other board members.
And Kabreed, if you have future, I mean, we can come back to if you have additional questions that you want to.
Can I piggyback on something that Kabreed just brought up, though? Thank you, Sarah. My concern is the information relayed to the board and the information so that we can make decisions and have conversations. Personally, I was not made aware of things. It sounds as though, and this is more directed for Sarah and our leadership on the board, sounds as though conversations were being had, but those conversations were not being had with the entire board. And that is concerning to me. Not in the conversations, there may have been comments, but not in the way that some people have information and others don't. And I know that we move collectively as a board, so I just want to express that concern. I want to express sincere apologies to Dr. Chappell for the behavior of the people on Saturday. I was not here, but I just heard of it, and just it's unacceptable. And I do feel that it's important that our board make a statement. Now, I'm not here for us to place, I'm not about sides. I'm not about us, you know, I don't want to move into a space of pointing fingers, because we're here to make sure that our students are safe and that our community is safe. And what Kabreed said about making sure that we were able to do something in 2 days that we couldn't do because there was an outcry. This is how we work. This is what happens. This is what it looks like in Oak Park. And it has happened repeatedly that a certain small group of people get very loud and then we have an emergency board meeting. And so there's a couple things that I want to know from within our board is the questions and the pieces of information that were put together for our meeting tonight. Were conversations had with Dr. Chappell about this conversation, where it needs to go and what needs to be done? Because she is the expert with experience in multiple pandemics. And I would really like to know, like, as far as our board discussion goes, how much of the conversation of our leadership on the board was had, or leadership of the administration was had with Dr. Chappell about the direction this conversation needs to go in to ensure that our students are safe.
So over the course of the weekend, I had a meeting with Tom scheduled previously. So we talked about this among actually many other topics, board related. And then I met with Fred. I ran into Fred later on in the day. In terms of talking to Dr. Chapman-Magruder, I did talk to her, I believe it was on Sunday. She was part of a conversation that I had with Dr. Johnson. And the question that I had for her at that time is similar to some of the questions we've heard tonight in terms of, you know, what do we need to be looking for in terms of, you know, we're going to do the testing. What are our targets in terms of how many students and adults in the building do we test? What happens when we get the positives back? Like when do we begin to enter a tipping point at which we might have to consider more severe mitigations? And then Dr. Johnson, you can speak to certainly the conversations that you would have had with her. I know they spoke for multiple times at the weekend.
Yeah, sure. But I think really to Gina's question about the questions kind of on the agenda, I haven't had any conversations with Dr. Chappell about that. I mean, our conversations have been dominated by the need for you know, collaboration about the mitigations and moving forward and all of that business. So yeah, just to be clear, but yeah, I mean, Dr. Chappell and I have talked obviously extensively over the past 5 days. So
I just would like to voice, Sarah, that I'm concerned because you've mentioned twice now that you've had conversations with some people, but not with everyone. And some of the people that you did not have conversations with did have a lot of questions prepared tonight, did have information that they were concerned about, but those conversations were not had. And in the interest of ensuring that I can do my duty as a board member, I would appreciate that conversations be had with everyone.
Absolutely, Gina, and I apologize for that. I was in communication with each of you at some point during the course of the weekend, but next time I will make phone calls to ensure that everyone has the information that I do. I will note the information was moving very quickly and changing very quickly. So every time I felt as though I knew what was going on, something shifted. That is not an excuse, but it was a rapidly evolving situation.
If I can, may I speak just for a moment to the tail end of Cabri's last question, and that is about how we kind of move forward and what we look at. And you know, we've already begun, far more than begun, to have conversations about what mitigation strategies we can realistically put in place as we move forward in the second semester, particularly after another long break. With the understanding that likely numbers will go up naturally because the factors that are causing the numbers to go up would continue. We're going to have the transitions. We're going to test. Vaccination rates without boosters are going to continue. The vaccination status are going to be later and later past their second shot and before boosters. I mean, all these factors, Omicron, all these things are going to affect it. And I want to be clear to the community. I want to be clear to our students. I want to be clear to the people in the room. What we are doing right now for our mitigation strategies is not sustainable. I just want to be really clear about that. It is not sustainable permanently the way we're doing it right now. We cannot sacrifice a curricular area permanently in order to do this work. It's just the reality of it. Using our, I've explained what all those mitigations are with PE and so on and so forth. We've talked about rotating in 3 different disciplines potentially, but the exact approach that we were able to come to over the last 3 days. I mean, I say that because it's important for a reality, kind of just to be transparent about what's going forward with us, but also to point out that while we were able to put something in place right now, given what we really saw spike last week, it is nothing that we would have pulled the trigger on in a regular time. So it's not like we had mitigations lying there over the past few weeks that we quickly could have done that would have shifted that. So I just want to be really transparent what that reality was and what this means for us moving forward. We're doing our best in a very challenging situation with those. So thanks for that moment. So.
Sarah, can I just respond to that just in brief, just for transparency? I mean, because Gina, you said, there were these other discussions. So I will be, in terms of what this is, you and I had a scheduled call to go through a myriad of topics, none of which were related to this, which we, just to kind of keep up to date. And then obviously this topic came up. And so my response was, what's the process going to be? And I'm going to prepare questions that I would hope that we could get in, as we go through a discussion so that we could help understand what the process is and how we're dealing with it. That was the discussion. That's not a board meeting. That's a one-on-one discussion. So.
Gina, did you want to ask a follow-up? And you're muted, by the way. I don't know if you need to.
I said, but the discussion should be had with everyone. That just as I understand how our board works, that boards work in that way. And it's important that if we've established that's how I feel that we move that way. So I want that to be really clear. And this is not a personal attack. This is how are we going to do this differently? And how did we miss this that we got to hear instead of being preemptive? The testing, Greg, you just mentioned that it's not just, we can't do this to scale. But prior to us, and I'm going to stop after this because I asked Tom not to occupy all the space and now I'm doing it. But prior to vaccines, we tested everyone in order for them to be in the building, right? So there is a possibility for everyone to be tested so that we could know who has and who does not, regardless of the vaccine. So there's I know that we did that. So the statement that this is not sustainable and we can't test, I mean, understandably, everyone has the right to opt out of that test. What it seems like is now that there's the possibility that people may lose an opportunity to play in extracurricular activities, which we really want them to do because we know how important that is for education, that now that that's a possibility, then at all costs, let's do all the other metrics. And our students and families seem more willing to do that so that we don't lose the opportunity to do that, which grateful for that. The other thing is, if we're willing to do that, I can tell you that educators do not want to go back to Zoom. So like whatever we have to do to make sure that we don't have to teach by Zoom again, the educators, I'm sure, are willing to do it because everyone I've talked to has said, please don't make us have to go back to Zoom, whatever we do. So I know that I would imagine that your team is working very diligently to make sure that that happens as well. But it's a community effort at this point. And if it means testing everyone again, we were able to do that at some point. So it's hard for me to hear it's not sustainable and we can't test everyone when I know that we tested everyone prior to vaccines.
And thanks so much. I'll be very, very, very quick in responding to that because it's really important. Last year we were able to use, well, we didn't use Shield. Shield is free to us right now, right? It comes with no cost. Safeguard was our company last year. Shield has a requirement that we cannot do at-home testing where you collect the sample individually yourself, put in your vial, and you bring it to the school and deposit it. That's not an option for us right now. Now, at D97 in some elementary school districts, that is an option. They allow that in K-8 districts. The state does not allow that at high school districts. This is what Shield has relayed to us for a few different reasons that they've explained. So we had a conversation even this morning about, okay, in order to do exactly what you're saying, Gina, do we need to just realize that this is going to cost us? We switch, we go with Safeguard, different protocols in place, and we just go after it the way we did last year. Absolutely, that's a conversation we had today, and we did preliminary pricing of that in our conversations today. So thank you very much for recognizing that the team is obviously trying to crank out these possibilities, and that is, one we're in the throes of exploring right now.
I think Fred had his hand up. I think Fred had his hand up first.
Sure. Fred, you want to go?
Is it my turn?
You want it to be?
Am I on?
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
We hear you, Fred.
Okay, thank you. I have a brief statement, and then I have a couple of questions to start, and I may have questions later. First, I want to thank Dr. Chappell-Magruder for joining us, and I would like to express my deep gratitude for your work and the service to our community. I was at the rally, and no one in your position or in Greg's position should endure what was directed at you. Right. My sole desire tonight is to listen and learn about our village health department and how it articulates with our district. At this point, in my opinion, it serves no purpose to cast blame or point fingers. We need to move forward together, as I always say, with what is in the best interest of our students, our community, and our staff. I want to briefly tell a short story because I believe it resonates with the 77% of our students who participate in extracurriculars and activities. I come from a unique perspective as I serve dual roles at this school. Not only am I a member of the Board of Education, but I'm also the head girls wrestling coach. I experienced something no one else in this meeting has experienced. On Friday night at about 7 p.m., I was in the field house, or should I say the new cafeteria, coaching our team when Dr. Johnson sought me out. He briefly explained the situation and showed me the letter that was going to be sent out shortly. I was shocked. I was dumbfounded. Right. As a board member and a coach, this came to me with no forewarning. I spent the better part of the next hour trying to figure out what I was going to say to our team. And that for the second time in 2 years, their chosen passion was being shut down. I barely got the words out. I was choked up because I know the sacrifices these girls had made to be where they were. The week COVID first struck, their state championship was canceled. Since that time, they've worked out in basements, on Zoom, in parking lots, in fields, at private clubs, in parks. Needless to say, they were devastated. They have done everything asked of them during this pandemic. They stayed home. They learned over Zoom. They masked up. They distanced themselves from their friends and their loved ones. They missed many, many normal teenage activities. All right. They got themselves vaccinated and they come to school and they wear masks all day. The pain was evidenced on their face. Their pain and frustration is understandable. Right. I am very concerned about how this continued pandemic is affecting the mental health of our students. I have firsthand seen there's a real effect on our students' mental health. So my first question is, and it's a little different than Tom's, all right, is how do we balance the risk of serious illness and death of the virus versus the negative mental, social, and emotional effects of the pandemic? Have these been measured? Are there metrics? And how does it get balanced? And that's my first question, so I'll stop. I have one more and then I'll turn the floor over.
Direct it to anyone in particular, Fred?
Excuse me?
Do you want to direct the question to anyone in particular?
I'll take a stab if you don't mind.
To the professionals, because I'm a layman.
So one of the questions I was asked while interviewing for this position is, what can we expect once we're finished with the pandemic? What is going to be the next big public health concern? What do you expect? And so I'm also a fan of history. And by studying the 1917-1918 flu pandemic, the very next major issue that came after the pandemic was mental health crises. And that is what happens after such a huge traumatic time in our lives, and having to take pauses, having to deal with sickness and death, and especially if it impacts you personally, that mental health is impacted by a pandemic. I think that people have seemed to start to believe that mental health is impacted by mitigations of the pandemic, but that's not the case. It's the pandemic itself that is causing mental health issues. And so there's a recent study that's out that shows that people who are actually gotten sick from the pandemic are 50% more likely to have adverse mental health outcomes than people who did not get sick from the pandemic, even though the mental health of the population itself is impacted by it. So what can we do to help address mental health issues during the pandemic? Is one, stop people from getting sick, mitigate the virus, figure out ways to stop the spread. If we do that, we will address the 50% increase that we see in mental health issues amongst those who are impacted by the pandemic. So that's my answer.
Okay, so I'm not sure I really got what I was looking for, because we know that there's a serious risk of illness and death with the virus. All right, that is mitigated to some degree. I think you'd agree with me, Dr. Chappell-Magruder, by being vaccinated. That's why I don't feel as panicked to walk out of my house today as I did, a year ago before I was vaccinated. And I'm just wondering, and I'll give you a very basic metric that I can look at. All right. Our wrestling team, by state rules, has to take a body fat test. They have to be weighed, hydrated, and their body fat is measured, and they have a very scientific way of how much they can, how much weight they can lose over a period of time. You know, I just curiously looked at a few of our wrestlers, and boys and girls, by the way, the entire team, from 2019 to this year. And you could see a rise in some individuals in body fat measurements. So I know that my mental health go-to, and exactly what I did Friday night, is to eat. I went and grabbed a big old slice of Salerno's pizza, and that's how I medicated myself. So I'm wondering if there are those kind of metrics out there that we can be looking at, whatever it might be. I know the mental health issue of it. My mother served for decades on the board and was president of Family Service, which was the predecessor to Thrive. So it's kind of something that's been in our family. So I'm just wondering if there is a measure, and at one point in time, do we say, all right, this pandemic is here to stay. All right. And you know, where do we go from here? That's just my thoughts. My other question, and this is to both Greg and Dr. Chapel-Magruder, is I did, along with Garib, I watched the village board meeting last night. And there was the underlining theme of communication was there. And the communication that was being described was about what happened last week and over the weekend and maybe a few days before that. And what I'm concerned about is there, in just hearing Dr. Chapel-Magruder talk now, and Greg didn't have a conversation with her till Wednesday. So it seems to me that there's no ongoing, regular, high-level communication between the Oak Park Department of Health and District 200. You know, this is the largest institution in the village. We have 4,000 people in this building, you know, during the weekdays. Again, I don't want to look backwards. I want to look forward. How can we be proactive, all right, with this communication, all right, and not reactive regarding our approach to COVID? All right. For me, it's unthinkable that a board member and a volunteer staff member did not know that this was imminent. So, you know, I'd like to know, is there a way that we can set up a system, and whether it's with the boards, the village board and our board, or with, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Chapel-Magruder, that we can have regular conversations moving forward, so that we know as the needle starts to move in a dangerous direction, all right, that we need to put some brakes on, what those brakes well before we get into a situation like we had on Friday night. And then I'll stop for now.
Certainly, I agree with the need as we move forward into the next several weeks, months, that ongoing high-level communications between both 200 and perhaps the village board, but certainly with Dr. Chapel-Magruder is absolutely needed. I think that's a fair point, and we can and will find a way to make that happen for sure.
Marianne, do you want to go next?
Let me unmute. Thanks. I'm going to try and keep this brief. I had a quick statement, and then I have three hopefully quick questions. I would agree with the other board members. I'm really saddened and shocked by how Dr. Chapel-Magruder has been treated, both throughout this weekend and by other personal attacks, which I've seen her enduring online over the last few months. From everything, I would say my personal assessment is over the last 18 months, she's done an exemplary job in a really difficult and fast-moving situation. The high school is just one of her areas of responsibility. Other areas have people at very high risk. And I'm glad that, and she's poured so much time and thought and energy into keeping our community safe. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a public health expert. And so I'm very glad that we have the benefit of her expertise in this difficult time. And I hope that whether or not members of this community agree with her assessment of the current situation and her decisions, that they can engage respectfully and appropriately in public conversation going forward. The second part of my statement is about sort of the high school's response. And in hindsight, I would say the high school administration could perhaps have communicated some of these details better, so that the public had a clearer understanding of the situation. But again, this is clearly a very fast-moving situation, case numbers spiking dramatically at the end of the week, with the new Omicron variant adding complexity. I know everyone, including myself, would like clarity and metrics. But I have to say, I come from a medical family. They're all doctors. And so I've been listening on an almost daily basis to them discussing it. And they're discussing the best strategy for today, every day, because there's always new information and the situation is always changing. And they're debating it and they're looking at research and then they're coming to a decision. And sometimes that decision will hold for a few days, and sometimes that decision changes the next day. And I think if you're not familiar with how public health crisis situations can run, it can seem very like, why are we turning on a dime? And I would say sometimes that's what the situation needs, the ability to turn on a dime. So I would say, this is also, it's new to all the medical people too. None of them they may have read about it, but none of them have lived through a pandemic before, right? So they are also figuring out as they go. My sense is that the administration made a decision as they gained new information. They modified that strategy, attempting to best preserve the health of our community members while simultaneously disrupting students' lives as little as they thought possible. I know the staff worked long hours over the weekend on this challenge. And I wanted to remind everyone listening that our communication team, they're terrific, but they're trained in educational communications. They're not trained in public health communications, which is, again, a very different kind of thing. And they've had to adapt to that challenge in the midst of a pandemic. Overall, I think they've done a tremendous job, even if there have been some missteps. And I think they deserve to be extended grace in this difficult time. So that's my little statement. Here's my questions. So for the administration, I'm glad to hear that we'll be exploring the budget cost of testing everyone. My question is actually about communications, and specifically, I was looking at the tracker that we have on the OPRF website. And if you look at it, you see December 3rd to 5th, 8 new cases, November 26th to December 2nd, 11 new cases, November 19th to 25th, 4 new cases. And it is, I think, not surprising to the public, that doesn't seem very big, right? My daughter is a freshman at OPRF, and she came home from school on yesterday and saying she didn't understand why everyone was getting so upset over a few cases. And I explained to her that, there had been a spike, and I literally was sort of doing it with my hand, like it went like this, right? And showing her what happened on the graph. And that she got, right? I think many of us are visual learners. And so my question for admin is whether it be possible to add to the tracker on the website a graph component to make this visible to people, so they can see we're going like, and then we went like that, right? To understand why there was suddenly an urgent need to respond, even if we had been, we may have known it was coming, but then it went whoosh. So you don't have to answer that right now. I'll give you my other two questions are for Dr. Magruder, and I think they can all be answered together. Sorry, Dr. Chappelle Magruder. So the first one's about vaccines, that they're not necessarily a one and done sort of thing. I hear a lot of people in the public kind of saying like, well, we're all vaccinated now, so we're done. And, why can't we just go back to normal? And, so just reminding people that the vaccine efficacy does wear off over time, which is why adults are recommended to get boosters. I'm sorry about those beeps. My husband and I have our boosters scheduled for this Friday. My own freshman daughter was vaccinated in March. So I would like to know if we have any sense, and I'm sorry, I haven't looked this up yet, of when boosters are likely to be made available to our students. Is that waiting on CDC approval? If not, is it something that we can facilitate rolling out quickly at OPRF, especially given that my understanding is that Omicron seems to have a much higher reinfection rate than the previous variants? Boosters seem like they're going to be tremendously important. And then my other question, and I feel like this is where everyone gets mad at me instead of at the administration and the health department, so bring it on. I've read this week that some colleges are already announcing that the first 2 weeks after break will be virtual. Presumably they're anticipating large spikes after holiday gatherings and travel. Obviously, that's going to be more challenging to do in a high school than a college environment. But I'd like to know whether this is something the administration is discussing and whether Dr. Chappelle Magruder would recommend that we consider that option of a planned 2-week virtual return after the break. And I say this as I'm a teacher. I don't want to do this, but if I do think that a planned 2 weeks of virtual learning is much less disruptive and manageable than needing to do an emergency pivot to remote partway through the semester because the case numbers have gotten so high. So those are my 3 questions. Graph as part of the data we give the public on that COVID tracker, vaccines for our students, booster vaccines for our students, and the 2-week, considering a 2-week remote after the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of boosters for people under 18, that would need FDA and CDC approval, and that has not been granted yet. There has been discussion, data is starting to be shared around those aspects, but that has not been approved yet by FDA and CDC. I am hopeful that that's something that may happen by sometime in January, maybe closer to the end of January. There's rumblings about that. I'm keeping an eye on it, and as soon as we know, we will be host clinics to get our people under 18 boosted as soon as possible. The other question about a planned pause. What we saw last year when schools kind of across the country did something similar and kind of waited to come back after break, what we saw was that families just waited to travel until after the holidays when traveling was cheaper and more affordable. So the planned break didn't do what we were hoping it would do, which was give people 2 weeks time after travel to see what the COVID transmission would be like and come back safely. So I think that it would take community buy-in. It would take a whole lot of work in order for it to do what it is that we would hope a planned pause would do. And yes, that's my answer.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Doing such a pause too, an adaptive pause like we were able to do last year when we were in hybrid is very different now. This one would require board action.
Rob?
Hi, thanks. A couple of short, quick statements, and I'm not going to ask my questions really, my substantive questions. I want to get some clarification questions done first. But the first statement I have is, Dr. Chappell Magruder, it's inexcusable the behavior that's been directed your way. You're an asset to the community. And I, for one, and I believe my fellow board members denounce that behavior. And we should have a situation where even if people disagree strongly with any recommendations or positions taken by anyone in a position of authority, they could do so in a way that is somewhat professional. And our lack of being civil in civic society is a real problem. So I want you to know I appreciate your service and I appreciate your guidance. Second, a number of the emails I received referred to the school district's response as punitive towards their students. And I just don't understand that. I have disagreed with things that the administration has done at D200, and I disagreed with them before I was a board member and when I was a parent. But I never thought that District 200 was trying to be punitive to its students in any way, or that any person affiliated with D200 didn't want to do what was best for our students at all times. And so I hope that message comes out loud and clear. The decisions that are made during a once in a century pandemic and that are being made under short time constraints may or may not be the right decisions, but they are always made with the interest of the students coming first, not to punish in any way students. So I just want to get that out there. And I think that's important. Now, my feeling as a board member is that it's incumbent upon us in situations like this to defer to the expertise of those who know. That would mean Dr. Chappelle Magruder. I mean, we at the board are very familiar with education and education policy. We're up to date with education and education policy. None of us are experts on communicable diseases, none. And I think deferring to expertise is the right thing to do. My prior life before running a think tank and being a university professor was a partner at a law firm. The way that worked is the different partners with expertise in different areas gave you the guidance. I was a transactional attorney, but I was not an expert on pension plans. I certainly deferred to the expert on pension plans when designing an acquisition. I wasn't going to make that stuff up. I would go to the environmental expert and get her advice on how to deal with the environmental aspects of the acquisition. So I just think deferring to the expertise of those who have knowledge is the right way to go. And to the extent that the administration opted to defer to the expertise of the Oak Park Department of Health, I think that's the right approach. So here are my questions, because I'm very much aligned with Reeb's questions. He asked what I was really wanting to ask, but I don't feel like I got his, or he got his questions answered, or at least it wasn't clear enough to me. So to design a path for going forward, I think it's important for me at least to understand if a number of the mitigations which we are now implementing in lieu of canceling these activities were on the table and available to us prior to making the decision to cancel activities, and whether a conscious decision was made not to go down that path for whatever reasons, don't have the administrative capacity, don't feel like we could do the testing, whatever it was. And so that the only way we could keep our students and their families, and let's be very clear, it's about keeping the students, the families, our faculty, their families, our staff, and their families safe. Because Fred, when you asked your question about mental health versus physical health, I can tell you when my daughter was a senior here and her whole second semester was done remotely, and she lost her prom and she lost her right to travel with the show choir after having finally made the show choir and not do her big performance, all of those things were incredibly difficult on my daughter. And you know, certainly impacted her mental health and view of the world. but not nearly so much as the death of her grandfather from COVID a year ago today. A year ago today, my daughter's grandfather died from COVID. The mental health ramifications of that are far worse than her missing her prom and her missing that opportunity. And so that's why I think ensuring that the decisions we make are ones that put the health of people first in a pandemic, it just has to be the way we go. But now to the actual decisions we made, I want to have some clarity on whether or not these other mitigations were on the table, were offered up or discussed or not prior to the decision to cancel activities, and whether or not our administration deemed the directives coming from the Oak Park Department of Health, and I'd also like clarity of this from Dr. Chappelle Magruder, by the way, it will help me understand whether these directives were advisory or mandates. Because the way I read the legal memo that we all received, we have to comply with mandates that are given to us by the Oak Park Department of Health on this issue. We don't really have an option. And so if we felt it was mandated that we utilize the mitigation of cancellation of activities as the only way to ensure the safety of our students, their families, our faculty, their families, our staff and their families, then we had to do that. If we didn't feel that was a mandate, that it was merely advisory, then the other aspects of the decision-making tree become important, because if we're gonna suss out a way to do a better job of responding to these types of crises that happen in a very short time frame in the future, I think we need to understand that decision-making process and the wheres and the whys and why certain things were eliminated then, which became feasible later. So that's where my questions are. And I guess, Greg, they're both for you and Dr. Chappell Magruder, just to sort of get some clarity on those. And this is to get transparency and really in a way to look towards moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. Dr. Chappell, do you want to take the lead on those conversations, or would you like me to go in first? I'd be happy to go either way.
I can start, and then we can just play off each other. So when I was having these conversations with Dr. Johnson, the conversations in the beginning were, here are some options, here are things that we can do, here are things that other schools have done. I reached out to the state, I got some ideas from them, I called Dr. Johnson back and had more ideas, and we kept going back and forth about different mitigations that could happen. Earlier in the week, we talked about lunch as being an issue and what could we do about that. And by Friday, it was, okay, we have talked about our options and now we must pick one. It was clear that crowding was an issue. We had 3 areas of crowding, and what we needed was that we had to come down and pick at least one of those areas that we could address, because on Friday we had 5 new cases that day, and I could not let it continue over the weekend into the next week and keep watching the case numbers increase without us coming down firm on a mitigation approach. And so I feel like I was extremely clear in that conversation that we had to pick something and that we would pick that approach and go forward with it. Was it an official mandate? I did not do a order that is within my authority. I did not write an order saying this. But what I did do is say, clearly we must pick something today, and these are our options. And then once we picked it, I restated that this is the option that we picked, this is the option that we're going with. So that's kind of how the conversation went and how we got to that mitigation measure. Were some of these mitigation options available throughout the beginning of the week? Yes, these options have always been available. They've been available throughout the entire school year, and these are options that are available that other schools are using in our community. However, when it came to the point where we had to look at what was feasible for the school, what was able to be implemented, and what we could walk away with actually doing, that was the conversation that we had on Friday and into the afternoon, into the evening, about this is what we must do, and we must do something today.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing that I would like to add, I think that's very good. I think what I would like to add to that is that the conversations about lunch that we had were ones that, in my conversation on Friday with you, Dr. Chappell, we knew we were making a move on that. We had talked about securing tents. We have an additional tent outside, and we knew we had to work over the weekend to figure out ways that we were going to get that done. What made any other kind of less restrictive option available was that we had this 80% target. You have to get 80% of your population in a screening protocol in order to get that done. And we simply did not have a way to pull that off. We don't have that many kids engaged in the system right now. And so starting that with testing on Monday or Tuesday when we don't have that was just significantly challenging for us. So it was not possible. Through the conversations into Saturday with Dr. Chappell, that 80% became something that was not that hard line that I initially understood it to be. And so as a result, that became back on the table. We also then talked about this additional layer for these for masks. So it really is a combination of those three things that allowed this to happen. But yeah, I just want to make sure that point is clear about why some of those other mitigations were not fully possible.
The only other follow-up I have, and maybe this is more for Dr. Chappell-Magruder, are there objective criteria that we could share with the school community that you utilize when you're looking at a rise in cases that say, if we see X, Y, or Z, or a combination of X, Y, or Z, that calls for an immediate, mitigation, and in some cases, a pretty significant mitigation, like, for instance, canceling activities, et cetera. So, I mean, understanding if there are some hard and fast guidelines that are data points that could be shared, I think that would be very helpful. I thought that your explanation of how meaning Dr. Chappell-Magruder's explanation about how all those factors came together that really compelled you to reach out to D200 and say mitigations were needed, that was eye-opening for me, and I appreciated that. And now really understanding what those criteria are, and if there are some basic ones that could be shared with the community so that we could all understand that and see that when these situations arise again, they may unfortunately arise again. We are in very uncharted territory. I think being able to share those data points would be a helpful thing if those data points exist.
And there are some general data points. The issue is that it matters in context. So, for instance, on Monday, the school nurses reached out, and last Monday, the school nurses reached out and said, we have 6 separate outbreaks that are happening in the school right now. There's no metric that would say, there's a certain number of outbreaks that's alarming. It would just be kind of when you get that data, that's alarming. So what in general, we have guiding definitions of what outbreaks are, and those are within a cohort. If you have 3 linked cases or 10% of a cohort, then that is an outbreak. And the school had multiple outbreaks going on, but also other concerns. So the fact that the close contacts were so high and that the contact tracing team was overwhelmed by that number, as any contact tracing team would be, then we knew that that was also a problem. And so I think that it's kind of impossible to say like what would be the one thing that would be concerning, because if it turned out that there was only one outbreak happening within the school, but also, you know, hundreds of close contacts, that would be the thing that would trigger uh, me saying, what are we going to do about this? If it's that we have high community spread, like what we see, as I mentioned, the community spread in the school was 4 times that of the community itself. That could trigger me saying we must do something about it. The goal is to prevent us from getting to where we are at a level where we must do something drastic, right? And so one of the things I remember being yelled at to me at the rally was, you know, that we need to be proactive. And this is literally what proactive looks like in the midst of an outbreak where things are changing, where there's multiple metrics, multiple data points that you must look at and that you must take into account. One of the other things that was concerning was the amount of people who were vaccinated that had the virus. If this was all amongst unvaccinated people, there would have been a different approach that we took to mitigations here. And so I really can't say that there's going to be one particular number that I want you all to look out for, and you know, and this is when I'm going to get concerned and start having these conversations about what are we going to do. It's really the context of it and um, and the impact of it. And these are conversations that I have. Someone mentioned earlier today that, you know, my job is not just to look at outbreaks in schools. I'm looking at outbreaks at daycares and long-term care facilities and kind of anywhere that they happen in our community. And I'm having these constant communications, constant conversations around what things look like. And I think that what could happen, instead of trying to kind of nail down and pigeonhole to a certain indicator that we're looking at, is that as we are seeing things, we can communicate those things quicker and faster, and saying, you know, when I call the school and say, hey, I'm concerned, or when the school calls me and says, hey, I'm concerned, maybe that's a good time to also concern the community. Hey, we're concerned about this and we are watching this metric at this time. Like, that's the thing to me that makes more sense than the trying to create a blanket something from the start.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. I think they're very insightful and I think they're very helpful. And, you know, walking down a path towards transparency, getting more and better information out in a more rapid way, given the rapid impact of this virus and how it can make a challenging situation occur literally overnight. And something that requires a much different reaction than it required the 24 hours before. Possibly, Greg, for our D200, maybe your team could meet with Dr. Chappelle Magruder and come up with a nice layperson summary of the kind of factors that create concern in an environment like District 200's environment. You know, more than one cohort seeing what's defined as a breakout, the breakout occurring in populations that are vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, and putting that into layperson's terms, maybe having a fact sheet and having that available just so that our stakeholders and community understand the factors that will trigger concern at the school district level and trigger these discussions with Dr. Chappelle Magruder and possibly even have to trigger additional mitigations. I think having that out there would be a helpful thing. And I think Dr. Chappelle Magruder's comments were very helpful on ways to communicate more quickly with stakeholders. The final thing I'll say, about denouncing that behavior. I wasn't at that rally because I had a family obligation that I was not going to get out of, since my son drove up here from Kentucky to be there, and I do like seeing my son. So I was not going to get out of that family obligation. But I do understand that there were some racial aspects to the attacks made on you, Dr. Chappelle Magruder. There's just no place for that. There's no place for racism. And in addition to denouncing the sort of the general behavior, I want you to know that your race should never be something that's utilized in an antagonistic, angry way against you. It is irrelevant to your job. And as far as I can tell, you're a tremendous professional who's discharging your responsibilities in a very difficult situation as well as anyone possibly could be expected to discharge those responsibilities. And I appreciate your guidance and assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. I truly appreciate you saying that. And if I can segue off of something that you mentioned about family obligations, in the last 8 nights, I haven't put my children to sleep, and my husband is having a really hard time right now with our 3 children. So if you guys don't mind, I think I am going to have to excuse myself from the rest of this meeting and help out my family.
We understand. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chappell.
Thank you, Dr. Chappell. Hey, Sarah, I had a follow-up question that
Yeah.
Ralph mentioned something that made me think about how often does the administration meet with, are there like general meetings that happen between the Department of Health and the village, and our board? Like, I don't know if there's like some general group that usually meets and has these conversations on a regular basis. How often does that happen?
There's a standing weekly meeting, Gina. So it's via Zoom. It's with folks from a variety of places in the community. And so depending on what's going on, sometimes it's canceled. Sometimes we trade off which administrator is going to be present in those meetings. I've been there. Principal Parker has been in those meetings. So there's a standing general meeting, the type of which you described. It happens on Fridays.
All right, just to follow up on that, does that include health metrics, or is that just about general topics of interest?
The types of health metrics kind of around the way that Ralph was just asking that question, or the way that Tom led off the meeting with his questions. Like what exactly are those triggers? Those aren't the types of questions, but we're talking about, what's the state of things right now. But I want to say that that's different to some extent in the conversation that Fred brought up earlier tonight, where he said, a high level kind of collaboration conversation specific to D200 is where Fred was going earlier. That's separate from this week. So I took Gina's questions as separate from Fred's. So I just want to draw that distinction there. So thank you.
Kabri?
I just have 2 quick statements of just things we should we need to do. My suggestion move forward. One, because when you mentioned Wednesdays when you started having a conversation with Dr. Chappell Magruder, Greg, but we were the district was in communication with Dr. Chappell's team or herself, nurse staff, whoever that was, those weekly meetings. We need to tighten up, I guess, that process. So if it's happening, the conversations happening in those meetings, and it's not getting to decision makers or your administrative team actually start talking about it. That was a missed opportunity because we were given these options a week before and discussing it. I know we have these standing meetings. That's what I was stated tonight. We need to make sure those are attended. And if it's not attended by personnel that can relay it on, if it's nursing staff, they have their hands full. I know that, but we have to make sure that there's meeting minutes. If it's someone taking notes, whatever it is, it needs to get to the hands of decision makers, people making decisions at the school. So I think that was missed, if I'm hearing correctly. And second, because kind of piggyback on Marianne's point earlier about we are very great as an education body, sending out educational communication. I'm not certain if the public health department was a part of that email that went on Friday about cancellation of activities. If it was not, I think if it relates to public health and anything of that nature, we should collaborate, if not filter through their lens, because they can communicate in a way that's actually digestible to everyone in the community. That makes sense. So those are my two statements, takeaways. I, much like everyone else, I'm exhausted, tired, disappointed. And I'll state it again for Dr. Chaplain Magruder. This is the sacrificial position you take, right? Anything in public and the public body, and even everyone here is serving the community. Just to be subjected to that kind of behavior and it to go on for months with not a real condemnation from people of power in this community is embarrassing. Simply embarrassing. And I don't say it's a little too late, but it is a little late because the condemnation, not saying it had to come from us, but we could have probably done a statement earlier. But it didn't come as Dr. Magruder and our family are being harassed, targeted, felt unsafe in your home, escorts. I mean, it's just, if this is who we are as a community, then we got to look at ourselves. If we condone this kind of behavior, we got to think of why do we allow it to happen? Why is it acceptable? Why are we not outraged by this? We were outraged by sports being canceled, but not outraged by a public official being harassed and targeted. And a Black woman of that who go through a tremendous amount of judgment and pain and taking this behavior, just getting to the point where they get to. So I'm just disappointed in the behavior and disappointed in the response, and disappointed that it carried on for this long. And I'm done for the evening with my comments. And when we wrap up, I will. No, that's it. I'm done.
Thank you, Kabir. Tom, I think you want to.
Yeah, I have a couple follow-up
Sure.
questions. I just want to dovetail on to what Kabir just said. In addition to what he just said, Greg, as a superintendent of this district, you have the passion of our students, at your heart, and for you to be, included in any of that bad mouthing, et cetera, is just part of the insanity. So I have whatever it is. I'm backing you. I'm tired. My questions are two. One is it relates to the comments, so these are follow-ups. One is you mentioned even about the 80%. There still seems to be lack of clarity in the decision-making process, and we need that. Okay, I don't know how to get there, but we need that. Okay,
Can I,
please?
one of the things that Dr. Chaplain and I talked about since, and she alluded to it in her comments, is that any exact mitigations, we have to make sure that we are communicating back and forth in writing. The speed of this decision on Friday that came to us was, was right there, and so we moved on that, and that's absolutely something that has to be improved moving forward. So, to that question.
Okay, so my second theme is it's a vaccination thing. Okay, and there's been some comments, and I fully agree with what Kabir was leading, which is really the mitigation strategy, the tools, the game plan was there, and it wasn't necessarily executed, right? I mean, if it is what, and I heard that, and if you look at it, the amount of testing we did has waned, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard also that, and it was from Dr. Chaplain Magruder said that, there were the percentages of students, but essentially what I heard was that there was a laxing, of students that are vaccinated in clusters. And I can tell you, as a vaccinated person, that behavior, right? I mean, it's like all of a sudden I feel like Superman, right? I have the vaccine. It's a big relief, right? But it comes, so there's some psychology or whatever it is. So my questions related to this is, we had a strategy initially that was a testing strategy that was again developed before we had students vaccinated. Okay, so that I keep going to, and so it lags because students started getting vaccinated.
Correct.
Okay, so how do we, and then per the discussion there, the vaccination process is ever evolving. Marianne, I think, was dead on when she said this is day to day. And so, yes, it wasn't booster, now it's booster. So the question I have is, how do we develop a testing strategy or mitigation strategy that factors in the evolution or what's going on with vaccination? That's and this is probably not for you, but for other, but that's what led us this way, is that vaccination came and we adapted or changed and got caught. So how do we address that? The second part of that is, it's a three-parter, the vaccination trilogy here. The second part is, from a communication standpoint, what do we need to do differently as it relates to communication regarding vaccination? Because, you know, is there understanding there that, you know, that of you know, that laxing, what the implications are? Are we communicating to people that you're not Superman? Which is what my wife told me, okay? And the third piece is, are we doing everything in our legal authority and power to maximize the vaccination level of our student population? So that's my three vaccine questions.
I don't know if I'm going to get them all here, Tom, but I will say that I think at least two of your questions can be addressed to some extent by a conversation that came out of a question earlier that Gina said, at least from an administrative side. Can't speak, I'm not the expert for health, but I will say that an option that we have explored is the possibility of going back to the type of testing that allowed students to self-collect their sample and then deliver when they come into school. That would allow these types of mitigations to go on as we move into second semester without disrupting the classroom, without disrupting learning for our students, and that's absolutely critical. And I don't know if I'm going to get all your questions, but legal authority for are we doing everything with our legal authority to get as many students as possible vaccinated? Two things,
including those in outside activities, if there's any difference.
And you mean vaccinated specifically? You're not talking about getting tested, correct?
Vaccinated.
Yeah. So let's keep in mind the very high percentage rate that we have, 81% for our student population. Yep. There are conversations at the state level about when and how she spoke to FDA approval, and eventually state level approval for these vaccinations across the board. And there are state level conversations on that I get updates on, and I'm able to participate in conversations about. But when the state and the country is really going to be able to move on that is anyone's guess in a broader way. But what authority we have in those conversations in the district is necessarily diffused, right? The community. But if anybody has any ideas about having more of a voice in such conversations, I'm fair game.
Is it may I ask, is it the same for extracurricular activities as it is for just students? I'm just curious. Is it
It's about the same time, sorry.
Can you mandate vaccination for extracurricular activity because it's voluntary?
School districts themselves, I mean, to my knowledge, have absolutely, we can double check this, but I would venture this is absolutely right. School districts themselves cannot require a vaccination for anybody, right? At any level. It really is the state that requires students to be vaccinated for the various vaccinations that are currently required right now. The state has voted to make that in place. So for us to arbitrarily, separate from what the state has required, to say, look, for every kids who are in athletics or clubs to have this vaccination, that would be a significant step. And I can get an official legal reading on that, but I don't think that's within our power. And I don't know if I want that in our power, frankly, as a school district. So.
Sam, did you have other questions?
That was the only other one was communication related to it because we have the issue, the Superman, right?
Right. There are a number of communications pieces that have been identified from the board meeting that we've touched on tonight and that you're speaking up to. And I know that, Karen was at the table here because we knew we were going to be speaking to that to some extent. And we'll have to revisit that and how to get word out to the community at large, to the importance of booster shots, as they become available, much less, if the 19% of our student population is not vaccinated. So.
I have a very practical question. So for
Yes.
students who have gotten boosters, right, because they are immunocompromised or on medication that makes them more vulnerable to infection, how are parents to upload the booster information?
We have a process that. You want to
Can they
speak to
do
that, Karen?
that the same way that they had before?
I don't know that anyone under 18 is able
One
to
is,
get a
one is in
booster.
my house, so.
Okay, then I don't know.
So when it becomes widespread available, the process would be the exact same way that we used for original vaccinations. We did it through Skyward. Chris and his team were able to set that up. We haven't hit, a mass at which, letting us know that would allow something different to happen with their behavior and how they engage within the school. But that's a good, in anticipation of that coming down the road, it is a fairly simple, straightforward process to execute that. So.
Questions from other board members? Okay.
Yes. Real quickly, I went to the rally as a board member to support Greg because I knew that it was not going to be a pretty place. I was appalled by the behavior of people and the people towards Dr. Chappell Magruder. But I want to thank Greg for his professionalism. He didn't waver. And he stood there for, I don't know, an hour or so afterwards, answering questions from students. Students from all walks, all genders, all ethnicities. They were very good and very tough questions. And we should be, those students were impressive. They were not, the ugliness of the crowd was not 100% of everybody. But I do have two questions. The first is we've heard about the mitigation with lunch, right? And I am forward looking. I don't want to look back. Our cafeteria and our SRC, I believe, are due to open at the beginning of the second semester. And question 1A is that true? Question 1B would be, will that cafeteria, putting that back online in its new configuration, satisfy, all right, the mitigation strategy that's needed to keep our kids separated during lunch?
So 1A, yes. 1B, and what was, it depends, because we are in a unique situation right now, all right? So if we have an outbreak going on, then likely we're gonna have to find additional spaces for us to fully address things while we're in an outbreak. But for the majority of what we anticipate going on second semester, yes. And to answer a question, maybe a slightly different question, but allows for a little bit more of a direct response. The additional SRC cafeteria allows us to increase the capacity, period. It has a larger capacity for students than the One West gym, for example. So, there is an increased capacity there, but exactly how we utilize that and whether we need to go to other spaces depends on exactly where we are with the pandemic.
Okay, thanks. The second question has to do with the other mitigation of activities and the suspension of activities. Back, we were going through a year ago the reopening of school and getting back to doing the sports and activities. there were hazard leveled risk activities that were defined by the state. Okay, so you had high level, you had medium level, you had low level. And then there were mitigations within each of those. All right. If something like this comes up again, all right, and I'm still not sure why activities were picked out, because many activities are not high risk activities. Can we look at individual activities in sports and determine individual mitigations that would be appropriate for each of them?
So I've had this conversation enough with Dr. Chapel where I feel like I'm speaking that with great, more specificity than otherwise, but with what we had previously, we did not have a clear cluster in any specific activities across the school, and several of the students were involved in activities. Number two, can we take an approach that allows us to implement mitigations in some activities and others? Yes. In fact, right now, what we've seen, I noted at the beginning of this meeting, we have 20 students who were identified for the first round of testing. We have 20 students who were positive. 6 of those 20 were from one activity. The majority of those 6 were on one level of that activity. And I'm talking about wrestling specifically, boys wrestling, varsity. And so as a result, a mitigation needs to be put in place specifically for that program, not athletics overall, but specifically for that program. And we've taken steps in that direction in the hopes of maintaining the competitive season, for the next few weeks for all the other levels, right? So we don't have to do that. And we anticipate that coming. If you hit that 10% threshold that Dr. Chapel was talking about a little while ago within a clearly defined group, then you satisfy outbreak and specific mitigations can be in place. So yes, and that's the way that would happen. Those are the triggers that would require different mitigations.
Okay. Thank you.
Marianne? Oh, sorry, were you finished? Marianne?
Yep, I think this will be quick. I just wanted to bring up and hopefully address something I'm seeing people asking in the community. One thing that people are saying is sort of that they're asking the question, given that vaccinated children tend to not get as sick as certainly unvaccinated children or vaccinated adults, they're sort of asking, why are we still responding so strongly to try and prevent transmission in this vaccinated population, right? Or mostly vaccinated population. And so I just wanted to, I was trying to research this a little. I was looking at the CDC page on transmission in schools. And there are just a couple of things that I wanted to point out. One is that, I think there's a misapprehension going around that children don't transmit as much as adults do, and that's just inaccurate. That studies that have systematically tested children and adolescents, irrespective of symptoms for acute COVID, have found their rates of infections can be comparable, and in some settings higher than in adults. So, we should be aware of that. We should also be aware that, if there's a spike in the school and there's a lot of transmission, that is putting vaccinated teachers, staff, parents, grandparents, et cetera, at higher risk, right? And so, as a community measure, we should be aware of that. I think it is very human to want to downplay risk to kids for some of us. I think it's so scary that our child may be at risk that, once there's they're vaccinated, phew, sigh of relief, we're done, right? And so I think we all need to be we need to be cautious about that impulse. children are less likely to develop severe illness or die from COVID-19. Nonetheless, and now I'm just going to read you a couple sentences and then I'll be done. 271 COVID-19 deaths among persons ages 5 to 17 years and 120 deaths among those 0 to 4 years have been reported through July 7th of 2021. The extent to which children suffer long-term consequences of COVID-19 is still unknown. And although rates of severe outcomes, hospitalization, mortality from COVID-19 among children and adolescents are low, youth who belong to some racial and ethnic minority groups are disproportionately affected, similar to adults. For example, a higher proportion of COVID-19 cases in school-aged children who are Hispanic or Latino or Black or African American were hospitalized or required intensive care unit admission than reported among white school-aged children. Underlying medical conditions are also more commonly reported among children who are hospitalized or admitted to an ICU than those not. So, I hate to say it, I wish we could just ease up and trust the vaccines will protect us, but I just don't think we're there yet. And we do still need to be quite cautious as the situation continues to evolve. Thank you.
Questions from anyone else? Or comments?
I would just add to what Marianne said that there's typically in Black, Indigenous, and people of color homes, they're multi-generational. And so those impacts of contracting and carrying the virus home is very large and impacts our communities more heavily as well. And thank you, Marianne, for your always due diligence on the research. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I have just a few, I think, sort of cleanup questions that are gonna be all sort of random. I have them covered through here. So the term outbreak is used frequently both by lay people and by professionals, and I feel like it gets really confusing sometimes what people mean when they say outbreak, because it is a common word that's also a term of art. Is there a way we could define it as we're using it on our dashboard so that it's clear to people what exactly that means in this context?
Yeah, Karen, do you want to speak to that really quickly? We talked about that just today.
Yeah, actually, we got clarity today from Dr. Chapel because there was a CDC definition that then there was a shift and then there was another change from IDPH in October. Where we are today, the conversation we had today with Dr. Chapel was that a school outbreak is defined as 3 linked cases where the transmission is happening at school, or 10% of a group. So, for instance, our varsity wrestling team passed that. Both counts actually qualifies as an outbreak on varsity wrestling team. So that's the definition we have now, and I can update the dashboard with that.
And I wouldn't want to do this in a way, of course, that might jeopardize the confidentiality of our students, but is there a way that we could possibly indicate how many of these various, without maybe indicating where these kids are coming from, right? Like not class A, not team B or whatever, but have a way to kind of track where these, how there are outbreaks. Because I've heard tonight, and I didn't write it down, I can't remember how many she said, but that was a surprising number of outbreaks that Dr. Chapel referenced that I don't think I was aware of.
And actually, she said 6, we have 4 linked clusters to my knowledge.
Okay. Is there a way we could maybe put that, on a dashboard?
Yeah,
As long as it's not revealing anything.
Yeah, we can look at that. And we did include that information in the letter that we sent to our families last Thursday. I feel, we've been transparent about that, but yes, we can, I'll take a look at adding that to the dashboard in a way that's not compromising student or adult privacy.
Yeah.
Can we verify if it's 4 or 6 also?
Yes.
Okay. So I still don't feel like I know what's gonna happen next time, right? And of course, none of us can predict the future. But if there is a way that through working with the health department and D97, I could see playing a role, potentially D90 as well, figuring out, helping us understand, helping us sort of figure out a protocol, like a response protocol for this sort of thing, so that we're not re-educating ourselves and the public. I felt last year, we did it all on our own, right? We had no real, the IDPH put out, frankly, nothing. And Dr. Prudhomme sort of had to get together an ad hoc committee and create the metrics, and it was a million meetings, and we don't really have that same structure in place this year. So I'm wondering if maybe that's something that could be created, working with our partner districts along with the health department, to provide some clarity for families.
Yeah, I think also working with our medical advisory group is a possibility as well for these conversations. That's a group that had been really dedicated to this work leading up to this year. I do want to point out one critical difference. We do talk about the metrics that existed last year. I was part of those conversations, developing them and implementing them, making decisions off of them. The metrics that we had in last year were a completely different type than what we were talking about here for mitigations. They were for the purpose of trying to figure out how you would go in and out of remote, hybrid, in-person learning and fluctuate between those macro changes in the population. As Dr. Chappell, I think, spoke, she said the same, she's been consistent talking about the point about metrics, and it's a nuanced point. It's kind of like descriptive metrics. You have to understand how these metrics are playing out in a nuanced case in the moment. Last year, they were concrete. If A happens, then B happens. If B happens, C happens, so on and so forth. This is a lot more nuanced, and it sounds, like that's not, as clean perhaps as we were last year, but I disagree with that entirely. I mean, it's a very context-specific conversation. So we just have to be aware that, and I think the conversation that Fred that asked just a moment ago about like where can we make the decisions? Well, this is how you kind of pick apart what might happen on a wrestling team is a great example of that. So, so I just want to clarify the type of metrics we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That was a very different use of it. You did a great job on that dashboard, Frank, by the way. That dashboard last year was excellent. So a couple of things just sort of before I forget, do we need volunteers on Thursday for COVID testing? Do we need anyone from the community to help Shield, or do we think Shield's gonna have enough people here?
We may. I'll know more tomorrow. We have 2 teams coming in. We have the first date that our new Pivot healthcare crew is going to be in to help us, who is now our permanently assigned third-party provider for Shield testing. We also are going to have a large crew coming into us from Shield because we're in this outbreak status. And so I'll know, actually just today, Lisa Evans and I were talking, and she reached out to that third-party provider to get the number of exactly who they are bringing in. Once we know that, then we'll be able to figure out what we need. But if we need help, I appreciate it, and I know we're going to be able to get some folks in. So
yeah, I'd like to thank the village for their masks. I don't know if we have any thoughts about procuring additional masks. I have to anticipate that the village is not going to supply us with masks forever. At some point, this will come to an end. So do you think we'll procure more?
oh, sorry. Yes, we'll procure more. The KN95s were something that she's helped us out with, and she will continue to help us out with. She said she'd get as many as 5,000 in coming soon, but keep in mind that we were providing surgical masks to any student who would come in without a mask on a daily basis, and so we could continue to just scale that out as well.
Right, okay, or maybe there's some bulk purchasing options too with the village.
Perhaps.
I'm sorry, Sarah, can I just throw in just a point of information, Greg? There may need to be a little more training on the masks for those handing them out, because my daughter was pretty frustrated that she was wearing a KN95 when she came in and was told that she had to switch to the surgical mask that was handed to her. So just, I know this is all happening very fast, but just being sure they understand that.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so I trust that the administration will come with us for any additional items they might need for mitigations, whether it's safe care testing or whatever it is. So I too was at that rally on Saturday. I got my booster shot on Friday and felt pretty awful, but decided that I didn't frankly feel that it was fair for Greg to sort of and Dr. Chaplin-Magruder to be doing that alone, right? Like, I don't know what moral support I could really provide, but I did my best by being there at least. And I was, I don't know, shocked probably isn't the right word, but I was really aghast at how that crowd responded to what they were being told by Dr. Chaplin-Magruder and also by Greg. You know, they'd ask a question and then shout down the answer so that the person being questioned couldn't even respond to the question asked. I've never seen anything like it. And to say it was disappointing and disheartening is like, does not do it justice. And I just think it's incredibly unfair. Certainly Dr. Chaplin-Magruder should never feel unsafe in her own home from her, the people, the community that she's here trying to help. It's just, that is absolutely inexcusable, and I can't even imagine. So I think as we sit here tonight, sort of reflecting on how we can be more supportive community members would be helpful, and it might actually help our leaders do their jobs of leading, and instead of being in responding to angry crises mode all the time. It's really hard. I know for a fact how much Dr. Johnson was on the phone this weekend with Dr. Chaplin-Magruder. He was also on the phone all weekend. Certainly the administration was equally embroiled in trying to figure all of this out as quickly as possible. And this figuring out was happening as early as Friday. There is this sense out there that parents were the ones who turned the tide on whether or not we had after school activities and et cetera. That was not what I saw. Certainly I saw, Greg and his team snap into action as fast as they possibly could before the communication went out to families, right, to try to figure out a way to prevent this from happening. So I would like to say thank you to our administrators for all of their incredibly hard work. Thank you to our faculty for being so accommodating and supportive. On Monday with the saliva testing, it was a bit harried at times. I mean, there were lines going around the auditorium, which is a big space, like hundreds of students deep, and thank goodness for those gym teachers because they really helped keep the crowds moving, people going where they needed to go. It was incredibly helpful that they just were so quick to be, do everything they could do to help the process. So it was also great to see community members who really were pitching in to get students back into activities, and without that handful of parents that came, I don't know that it would have happened. It was one parent grabbed a neighbor and another friend. I think maybe only one of the 4 people that came had a child in an activity. I think one woman didn't have any children in the school at all. So I thought that was really, really impressive to see our community working as fast as they could to keep our kids safe, to keep our faculty safe, and to get everyone back into the activities that they deserve to be in. So that's that, I suppose. Does anybody want to say anything else before we adjourn this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Great, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you everybody for the short notice, and I appreciate your time this evening.
Got it.